Sure.
Everyone is going to die. Honestly,
Yeah.
philosopher queen Joni Ernst,
That might do her more damage than the actual comment in Iowa, but
being a philosopher.
being a philosopher queen, yeah.
Hello and welcome to the GD Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Druk. The contours of the 2026 midterms are taking shape in House districts across the country, and Inside Elections just released their most up-to-date ratings. So today, we're going to spotlight 5 districts to watch. Democrats only need to flip 3 seats in order to gain control of the House, but how deep into Trump territory are they trying to compete? We're also going to get into that, Trump-Musk breakup last week with today's GDBD, so happy Pride, folks. A recent piece in Politico argues that based on the polling, quote, Musk boasts his own base of support that exists outside traditional partisan boundaries, particularly marked by the parasocial relationship young men have with him. That makes him a danger to a fragile coalition Republicans relied on in 2024. So is that a good take based on the data? Here with me to discuss it all is Jacob Rabashkin, deputy editor at Inside Elections. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks for having me, Galen.
Always a pleasure. So let's begin with our GDBD example. Do you know how this goes? It's good data, bad data, not data.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so an article in Politico argues in the headline, quote, the polling on Elon Musk is a warning for Republicans. It reads, quote, in the most recent Economist YouGov poll, 76% of Republicans viewed Musk favorably, compared to just 18% who viewed him unfavorably. A late April New York Times Siena College poll placed his favorability rating among Republicans at 77%. It goes on to say, quote, that may change after Musk's scorched earth breakup with Trump, but the odds aren't great. Musk's standing within the GOP has remained remarkably high since the beginning of the Trump administration. Over 70% in most polls. That makes him far more popular than House Speaker Mike Johnson, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, and almost everyone else in the party. Finally, they say, if it seems like the GOP cavalry has been slow to aid Trump so far, that's because Musk strikes fear into office holders who can easily envision him funding primary challenges and hounding them on social media. And it's not just the individual electeds who have cause for concern. Musk on Thursday floated the idea of creating a new political party that actually represents the 80% in the middle in an online X poll. In less than 24 hours, more than 5 million votes had been cast. So, Jacob, is this take based on good data, bad data, or not data?
I mean, he cites one poll, so maybe to be generous, it's bad data, but this is no data. I think that this take was completely off base. I think it's a fundamental.
Spicy.
Yeah, I don't know. I was reading it and I kept thinking that there would be more. I think that it's just a fundamental misreading of Republican politics right now, and I can't agree with it. I don't think that it's based on anything more than kind of vibes and the newscasters' urge for drama and consternation that I think a lot of us, whether we admit it or not, like to have.
So you're not convinced by that polling that Musk has some enduring popularity amongst Republicans that could prove deleterious to elected officials or the party?
Yeah, just because he's popular right now doesn't mean that he's going to maintain that popularity if Trump really goes after him. I think taking 10 steps back, who knows if this thing will actually blow up? I mean, it blew up pretty spectacularly at the end of last week, but then Elon deleted his tweets. We're in kind of a weird interregnum here. Are they going to keep going at each other? Is there going to be a détente? I mean, if Trump is known for anything, it's the ability to turn on a dime and patch things up with people who he wants to play nice with. He went from threatening to nuke Kim Jong-un to exchanging love letters with him in a matter of months. So I wouldn't put it past him to mend those fences with Musk. But even if they do continue to be at loggerheads, Trump is Trump. He is a singular figure in the Republican Party. And just because Republicans happen to like Elon Musk right now doesn't mean that they're going to pick him over the guy who has single-handedly rearranged the entire politics of the United States around his own personality over the last decade. It just doesn't hold water.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking for some data to back up that view, Jacob, YouGov, always first out in the field, asked Americans, I think the day after the blowup, which, by the way, the blowup was on Thursday. Last Thursday's episode we recorded on Wednesday, which is why we didn't spend the whole time talking about Trump and Musk. So my apologies, folks. But in any case, out on Friday, YouGov had a poll that showed Republicans siding with Trump over Musk. 71% to 6% if forced to choose between the two. And for what it's worth, I don't know that it's worth all that much, but if you just compare their popularities with Americans overall, Trump's net approval right now is net -4. Musk's approval is -11, which, by the way, has ticked up a little bit since the fight, up 3. I think that's mostly amongst maybe independents or Democrats who thought he was an asshole, but now are cheering for him because he went for Trump's jugular on Thursday. But I think there's another question here, which is not just if forced to pick between Trump and Musk, who would you pick? It's does Elon Musk have any sway in Washington, and particularly given the money that he could spend in politics, are other rank and file Republicans going to be somewhat afraid of him? Which gets to the question of like, if Musk really wants to, can he tank this big, beautiful bill?
I don't think so. No, I'm really skeptical that he has that power. Troy Nehls, who is a pro-Trump, one of the more pro-Trump members of Congress at this point from Texas, who, funny enough, got elected to a Biden district in 2020, and then when he got redrawn to be in a safe seat, became much more conservative. That's why redistricting matters. I mean, he said Elon can come to my district and run against me personally. I'll pay his filing fee. I don't think that Republicans are particularly scared right now of these threats from Musk because I'm not sure how seriously they ultimately take them. I think that obviously he's got a ton of money, and money counts for a lot in politics, but I guess I'm just not convinced that he is in a position to want to or have the ability to use that leverage. And that's for two reasons, right? The first is that the issue that he has picked to stake his claim on, this kind of deficit reduction, oh, there's too much spending in the bill, there's not enough cutting. This is Republican orthodoxy from like 15 years ago. This is not Republican orthodoxy from the era of Trump, right? Trump added more to the deficit in his first term than any president in American history. And Republicans did not care, right? There's a portion of the Republican Party that likes to talk about deficits still and thinks that it's kind of the main thing that they're about, but they are no longer the dominant faction. That's Thomas Massey. That's, Rand Paul. Those are the guys who are most straightforwardly with Musk here. I just don't think there's an appetite for that kind of Tea Party-esque fiscal conservative over everything else in today's Republican Party. And so if that's going to be Musk's message, I don't think it's going to communicate. The second point is you said, Galen, on your show last Thursday, because you did touch on this a little bit, that if Musk could run for president, right, if he had been a natural born American citizen, he would have done it. He would have been Ross Perot. And I actually disagree with you on that front because I don't think
Mm.
that Elon has the kind of single focus maniacal nature that Ross Perot had, that he was able to uh kind of focus in on running for president as like the one thing that he was going to devote all of his time and energy and resources to, in the same kind of uh methodical way that he approached his business. I don't think that Musk has that capacity. I think that he's spread far too thin. He's on too many drugs, and he, I
Allegedly.
just, Well, I mean, he admits to some of it, and reportedly a lot more. I just don't think that even if he could run for president, he could actually run the kind of operation that Perot managed to stand up.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, though, with regards to the debt and deficit, it seems like we're on a cycle in American politics where every 15 years or so, it becomes something of a motivating feature in politics. And it's because we've hit some sort of breaking point where it starts to enter the zeitgeist, whether it's the bond vigilantes who start talking about it or part of one of the parties that starts talking about it. It seems to grab hold. And once it does, it really has a lot of power because people feel this intimately. They understand, if I'm way over leveraged in my personal life, my finances going into the future are going to be shit and I'm not going to have money to spend on the things I want to because of interest payments. It feels intuitive to people. Now, politicians can and do argue different sides of that, public funding and public debt works differently than private funding and debt. In some ways that's true. In other ways, it's not all that true. At a certain point, we do spend more and more on interest payments that we can't spend on other things. And I think that there is a little bit of an opening here now for folks to start criticizing the status quo government over debt and deficit spending. Honestly, it's something that if Democrats wanted to bring up, I think in the midterms or even in 2028, they could. I don't know if there's a commitment on their part, but if Musk talks about this for the next year and a half up until, the midterms, I think that does do damage to Republicans potentially. One of the best ways to neutralize the other party's advantages is for criticizing them over those advantages, right? Oh, you say you care about the debt and deficit. You're a bunch of hypocrites. You're the same old politics who never get anything done. It's anti-elite rhetoric. It's anti-status quo rhetoric, which is really powerful in America. So maybe the actual content matters less than, hey, you guys are hypocrites. You're the same old politicians who say one thing and do the other. And, we're coming for you. I mean, you can do it on any kind of issue. You can do it on immigration. You say you're going to deport all the criminals. Well, you're being less effective and less efficient at deporting criminals than Obama was. So, you're saying one thing and then doing another thing, and you're not even deporting people well enough that you can keep them deported because you're illegally deporting them. And so they end up having to come back to America and then you have to litigate it in court. Like, this is not an efficient, effective way of getting rid of the people who are in the country illegally and also have a criminal record. So, like, a smart party can do this kind of stuff. Elon Musk, being unassociated really with the Democratic Party and only being loosely and recently associated with the Republican Party, is maybe the key kind of person to dislodge the independents and the anti-elitists and the anti-status quo voters from Republicans' coalition.
Maybe. I guess I'll believe it when I see it. I don't think that he's really I don't think that this is really his life's purpose. I think that if anything, he got to deficit reduction long after he got to the Republican Party, right? It was the social issues, it was censorship, it was, trans kids, it was those kinds of things that brought him to the Republican Party to begin with. And it's only, in the last couple of months with Doge and everything that he has become the fiscal hawk guy. I don't think that this is something that he holds particularly deeply in terms of his relationship to politics. And I'm just skeptical that he's going to put forth the effort or resources
Right. Okay.
to,
I think that's more of a fair argument. Like,
yeah.
but then that's starting to look at the anatomy of Elon Musk's personality, which I don't know that we have any data on, and I'm ill-equipped to do. Like,
or will to do. Yeah.
I think a person could do it. Will Elon Musk do it? I mean,
Yeah.
shruggy emoji. But
Yeah,
this actually,
if he were to air $1 million of ads against Ken Calvert for voting for this bill in California 41, in the same way that he ran $1 million of ads for Ken Calvert last cycle, yeah, that would make a difference. I just don't think he's going to do it.
can we touch on one other thing that's related to this? Musk's assertion that there's 80% of Americans in the middle who would support a third party. You're already rolling your eyes. I have a feeling I know what argument you're going to make, but make it just so that I can respond.
Polls always show that lots of Americans, I don't know if it's 80%, want a third party because people don't like the Democrats, they don't like the Republicans. They aren't all talking about the same third party. They all are talking about a mythical party that conforms to every single one of their specific idiosyncratic political beliefs. That party doesn't exist. And if that party did exist, we'd have 300 million of them because they'd all be different. So, sure, yeah. Do Americans in theory want a third political party? Do they want more options? Yes, absolutely. 80%, 90%, whatever the number may be. In actuality, is there a hypothetical third party that could appeal to those 80% of people? No, it doesn't exist. It's a pipe dream. It's not how our political system is set up. And if he wants to throw $1 billion at it, he's going to buy a lot of consultants in DC, third houses, and second boats. But he's not going to change politics.
Okay, I had a feeling that that's exactly what you were going to say. So here's my response, which is in my almost like 15 years, I'm getting old, almost 15 years covering politics, right? Like we always talk about past as prologue and history informs what will happen next. And in general, everything that we have, all the data we have historically suggests that this doesn't work. And instead of starting a third party, if you really want to change American politics, you should take over one of the parties that already exists, as Donald Trump did. We are in a place, though, in American politics where what's like 43% of Americans identify as independents just because the party's brands are so bad. I mean, people really both, if you look at them, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are unpopular. The Democratic Party is more unpopular than the Republican Party today. It's net negative 20 favorability versus Republicans, which is net negative 10. But there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the status quo. And in a situation like that, you are not going to be able to find a policy agenda that will appease that 43%, let alone that 80%. So, what has happened in other countries, and of course, this is countries with multi party systems, is the way that you get those people into a coalition is you run a kind of anti politics campaign. It's not really about policy. It's really about how the status quo, the politicians today are ruining America and that we all need to unite and sort of be above the right left divide. You know, I think Elon Musk is a kind of character. I mean, obviously he can't run, who might be able to do something like that because he has some credibility and lack of credibility that spans different partisanships. But think of like the Five-Star Movement in Italy. It's not really a political movement so much as an anti-political movement. The way you get a bunch of people who all are just generally discontented on board with you is you say the people who are doing it now suck. We just need to get them the hell out of DC. And then the rest is gravy. And in doing that, you can sort of pick popular positions from both sides of the aisle. I mean, Ross Perot hammered on the debt and deficit, but then when asked about abortion, he was like, yeah, get an abortion, right? You know, you kind of can, when you don't belong to either the Democrats or Republicans, the advantage is that you can just pick the popular position from either side. But the main message is fuck these guys who are currently in power. So, you know, we are getting to a place in American politics where there's so much discontent that somebody could, with a lot of money and charisma and the right kind of arguments, could at least blow things up and make them interesting. But a viable third party, I'm still not sure.
Yeah, again, I'm in the believe it when I see it camp. I think that Perot uh, Perot is kind of the only instance in which we've seen kind of proof of concept of that. And even him, he wasn't able to replicate his own success between 92 and 96, right? He still did decently in 96. He got about 8% of the vote, but he got 19 in 92. And that was after he dropped out halfway through the election. He was leading in the polls. And, you know, I think Perot suffers from some of the same things that Musk does in terms
Well, now
of,
you're arguing against yourself. You were saying that he was singularly focused, but then he got sidetracked with like some weird accusations about his daughter and dropped out of the race.
Sure,
And
sure. I think that Perot, it was more focused than Musk was, but ultimately fell prey to some of the same, issues that I think a lot of people who are that rich and successful have. No, I hear you on that. I'm skeptical. I think in a first past the post, two-party system, it's just real difficult. And if anyone were to do it, I do feel like it would come up like not from a top down, but from a bottom up, right? If you had the resources and the wherewithal to start running minor party or third party or independent candidates at the local level, at the state level, and try to gain a foothold from which you could then launch national campaigns, I think that would be more compelling to me than these kind of one-off cults of personality third party campaigns that either happen or that we talk about, like Mike Bloomberg or
yeah,
Oprah or
cult of
whomever.
personality always fail in American politics, Jay.
outside of the two-party system, they kind of do. I think it's I don't know. I'm skeptical. I think we're stuck. I think these are our options.
All right. I just want to note before we move on that Polymarket was basically giving away money earlier this year. So on the very first episode of the GD Politics podcast, I played Buy, Sell, Hold with Nate Silver, and the odds that Musk would be out in 2025 were at 43%. Nate obviously bought at those odds. You could have too. You would have been rich. That's why you can make money listening to the GD Politics podcast. But let's move on and talk about those House districts. In order to flip Congress next fall, Democrats would need to win 3 seats in the House and 4 seats in the Senate. We've talked a bit about the Senate before on this podcast, so today we're going to focus more on the House, where primary campaigns are taking shape. Now, I asked Jacob to name the 5 districts to watch. He chose 4 and left me to pick the 5th, so we'll get into those. But first, let's talk about the generic congressional ballot, which asks Americans, if the election were held today, which party would you vote for in the House? From what I can tell, Real Clear Politics is the only outlet with a current average posted, and it shows Democrats leading by 2.5 points. That's up a little from early May when we first talked about it. Then it was Democrats up by 2 points. So, Jacob, what does the generic congressional ballot tell you about the state of the 2026 midterms today?
Much. I'm not a huge believer in generic ballot kind of this far out. I mean, look, we're in June of the off year. That means we've got, if my math is correct, right, 17 months before election day. I'm not too focused, I guess, on what the generic ballot says right now. I mean, from one perspective, right, the generic ballot at this point in the 2017-2018 cycle was significantly better for Democrats, probably a 7-point advantage. So, to the extent that we can try and draw comparisons between the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration, perhaps a little bit less energy on the Democratic side than that time, which I don't think would surprise anyone if they heard that. But overall, I mean, I think it speaks to kind of the thermostatic nature of politics, right? Republicans are in power, Democrats have an edge heading into the midterms, and we'll see how it develops, over the next 17 months. I think presidential approval rating is just as important a metric at this point, and for our purposes, at least, we're far more interested in who's actually getting into these races. Are good candidates deciding to run for Congress? Are people afraid of running? And are members of Congress going to retire rather than seek re-election in what they think could be a more difficult year?
So I get it that you, as a member of one of the ratings groups, puts less stock in the generic ballot polling than some of the other folks we would have on this podcast, like Nathaniel or Mary, because they were pretty much like, all right, these Democrats are winning. This generic ballot polling is only going to get worse for Republicans from here, et cetera, et cetera. But you're really looking at the nitty gritty and seeing who's running in each district and whether or not they're a good fit.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with the overall concept here, right? We know we're in a midterm election with a Republican in the White House. We know that in the last 100 years, the trend has been that the party in power loses seats in the House. I think it's 22 out of the last 24 midterm elections. The president's party has lost seats in the House. They've always lost more than 3 seats in those 22 elections when they lost seats. So there's no universe, there's no example of a president's party only losing 1 seat in the House or 2 seats in the House. They've always lost at least 3. The only 2 times where that didn't happen um, are 1998 and 2002. Monica Lewinsky impeachment, Bill Clinton, and aftermath of 9/11. If you go back further, you got to go all the way back to 1934 in the midst of the Great Depression, where FDR picks up more seats in the House. So Republicans have to ask themselves, like, is the current political situation analogous to the Great Depression, the Clinton impeachment, or the aftermath of 9/11? And if the answer is no, they're going to lose seats in the House, and history would say they're going to lose more than 3, and so Democrats are going to retake the majority. I think that's a separate question than, like, what does the generic ballot say right now? But it's all part of a larger piece about who has the momentum heading into 2026.
Okay, well, with that, let's start our tour. And where are we headed first, Jacob?
We are going just north of Denver, Colorado. in the beautiful 8th congressional district in Colorado, one of the newest congressional districts in the country. It's only been around for 2 election cycles, and it's also one of the most closely divided districts in the country. It was won by a Democrat in 2022, a Republican in 2024. It voted for Biden in 2020. It voted for Trump in 2024. And it's got a little bit of everything. It's got a freshman incumbent, a young Hispanic guy who is viewed as a rising star in the party with a military background. It's got a former Democratic incumbent trying to reclaim her seat while struggling with some very serious mental health challenges, and a whole bunch of other Democrats who are vying to take on incumbent Gabe Evans as well, including Manny Rutinel, a young state representative who got in the race and raised $1 million kind of out of nowhere in his first couple of weeks. So a lot
Wait,
going
was
on
that because
here.
people thought he was hot?
So he is objectively very handsome, right? Like, I'm not breaking any news by saying that. I don't think that was the only reason why he raised a lot of money. I think he's got a lot of connections. He went to Yale. He has been involved in kind of the Silicon Valley VC space, I think, in some of his kind of green agriculture startup programs. So he's got some connections. I think it doesn't hurt that like he looks good when he cuts an Instagram ad and gets people to donate to him.
You sent me in the message that we were corresponding. You were like, one of these candidates has gone viral for basically being good looking. Is that I didn't, you didn't say who it was, so I just had to look up the candidates and be like, which one of these people do I think could go viral for being good looking? And that seemed like the only plausible answer. Is that the person you were talking about?
Yes, that is
Okay,
Manny
got it.
Rutinel. Yeah. Um,
Um, People can do their own research and decide for themselves. But I'll add, speaking of having Latinos running in this district, the district is about 52% white. It's almost 40% Hispanic. And then from there, they're, about 4% Asian, 2% Black. But it is a district that has a large representation of Hispanic voters. Obviously, people will not be surprised to hear that that's a group of voters that went significantly to the right over the past decade or so. So I think it's an election to watch from that regard as well. But what do you currently rate it? And does it depend on who ends up winning the Democratic primary there?
Yeah, so we have it rated as a toss-up, which is our most competitive category. It's going to be a really close race. It was decided by under a point in the last 2 cycles. But I do think that there is some concern that if Yadira Caraveo, who's the former member who won in 22 and lost in 24, if she's the Democratic nominee, she's going to have some challenges because she has faced a number of damaging stories over the last couple of months since she got in the race, both about her mental health struggles, her 2 suicide attempts in 2024, and several allegations from her staff of abusive behavior, essentially, that she mistreated them during the course of her campaign. And so there's some real trepidation among Democrats, both in Colorado and here in DC, that if she is the nominee, she's not going to be able to put together the campaign that's necessary to win such a competitive and must-win districts for Democrats. We'll see. I mean, sometimes there's a lot of fear about certain candidates and their ability to win. And then if the cycle is good enough and they are able to improve enough, it doesn't end up mattering. But certainly I think that there are other candidates in the race who probably would have fewer obvious vulnerabilities than she does.
Now, Gabe Evans, the Republican who currently represents the district, obviously is representing one of the most closely divided districts in the country. And I'm just curious, you sort of offhandedly mentioned the effects of redistricting earlier in the show. Has the fact that he represents such a purple district shaped his tenure in government at all? I mean, has he been trepidatious about voting for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act? Has he said other things that have sort of provided him some distance from more unpopular parts of the Republican Party or what have you?